All right, welcome to another video. Let me make sure, yep, I'm using my headset for my microphone. So one thing I noticed kind of is a bug going on in GNS3 is sometimes it really doesn't keep the most recent commit when it reboots and it reverts it back to the previous one. So I'm going to start off today's video by just verifying that the configuration is all correct and it's not reverted. And hopefully, if that is all set, which, yep, sure enough, it looks like, I mean, it was clear at the end of last video that I actually did go and commit this newest config, but you can see that it's very clearly not at that config. So that appears to be some kind of bug, but the more practice, the better. I'm really going to need to know these commands and really get sick of entering them and just have them be second nature to me. So it's just more practice, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So I'll need to change the host name again. I forgot about that. All right, and I think I'm going to go ahead and save this configuration. All right, so now if that happens again, I can more easily revert it back to the base config and then just get practice typing out the new commands instead of having to waste time setting it back up to a blank slate. So here's the issue that we downvoted for last video. You can see that this 127.0.0.1 is part of the 127/8 subnet that is reserved for special purposes. So the device rejects that subnet for use as a router ID. It's really not meant to be sent out to other devices for other purposes. It's meant to be self-referential. So it really wouldn't make sense to have that be an ID because you wouldn't, I think a good analogy would be it's like asking the people around me to refer to me as I. Well, that wouldn't make sense, and I'd get really confusing quick because you'd have somebody asking you, hey, can I please have a bite of that cookie or something like that? And it's like, well, see, even now, how confusing it is. Or here's a better example. Can I please stop talking so loudly? Well, if you're saying that to me, can I please stop talking so loudly? I'd be like, well, you're not talking loud at all. I guess you can, but there'd be no change. But if what they're meaning to say is, can you please stop talking so loudly? See, that's quite a bit different. And that's why it doesn't make any sense at all to have a router ID in this 127/8 block, because this is meant to be self-referential, and it'd be like other routers asking this router if they themselves can do some sort of thing. So you can see just how nonsensical it is to have this sort of address be a router ID. But it's perfectly fine to have it be configured on the loopback address, as long as it's self-referential. If we were going to kind of test a remote device learning that, we probably want to use a different address. So just right off the bat here, I will go ahead and use tens. Yep, so unfortunately, I already entered this all in before, but as I said, it's good practice. So here you can already see there might be some sort of issue because we're actually putting this interface LO00 into OSPF. Yes, it's a passive interface, so we're not going to be discovering neighbors on this interface, but we are going to be including this subnet into the link state advertisements and telling other routers in this OSPF area that, hey, this is a subnet you need to be aware of. But this is like saying I instead of you for if we're taking the perspective of a different router. So it can get confusing real quick because these other routers are going to say, hey, can I, etc. But what they're meaning to say is, can you? So really using this on the loopback, we might have some issues, but that's going to be really interesting. And I already downvoted it, so we won't need a new downvote if we run into those issues, but it will make for some interesting content. All right, so router A is done. I'll go ahead and save that, and hopefully if those files persist, it should be easier. So this is example. Well, I don't need to save it. I'll type it out again, maybe between videos if it gets lost again. I can use the practice. So luckily this one did persist. Well, actually no, it didn't. All the IP addresses are different. So let's go ahead and fix this. And change the host name as well. And maybe even set up the descriptions as well, just so that they're included in that initial configuration. All right, and now save that initial configuration. All right, so now it's time for the part that's going to be good practice for the test. And luckily, all of the interfaces are aligned So here we might have a similar issue where it's not correctly, it's not going to be referred to by other routers in a way that makes sense. We've got two external BGP connections, and it's going to be to different autonomous systems. This is going to be in 65541, 42, and 43. And of course, they have to be in different autonomous systems if it's going to be an external BGP connection. Otherwise, it would be IGP. Okay, everything looks good there. Moving on to router C. And you might think, if you're used to Juniper, oh, well, of course, the configuration, the running config was lost when the router reboot. He didn't do like a write or a copy run start or anything like that. Well, supposedly the way Junipers work is that commit actually takes care of all of that. So it's kind of another really nice feature of the command line with Juniper. It's kind of an advantage over Cisco, at least as far as the configuration is concerned, entering in configuration, is that commit takes care of just saving that. So it's going to boot up to that config automatically without you having to enter an additional command such as copy, run start, or write. You can definitely take a look at the boot up file, so the startup config as it's called in Cisco, and see if we can find that. This is something I actually might need to do a Google search for, but that's a really great thing to show on this channel, just how important it is to make those extra Google searches and kind of learn as you go. That's a really important skill in IT to be able to do that. Yes, it's important to ask your coworkers too, and kind of, you know, not let things go by. Having a good understanding of what you're doing, asking your coworkers, that sort of thing can be really important to that. But there are points where you'll ask your coworkers and your coworker will just go on Google and Google it himself and wonder why you're so lazy and perhaps a little bit slow that you wouldn't have thought to do that yourself before asking. So you definitely don't, you know, hopefully you're going to work with really nice coworkers who are never going to think that of you and always give you the benefit of the doubt. But if you're continually asking them, you know, what does ARP stand for? What is, you know, it's like, look it up before you ask. Like, please, like if you have a specific question, if you want to take advantage of the extra experience and expertise of your coworker, by all means, that is great, do that. But if you're just asking for something that you can get through 5 seconds of searching on Google, you're just really either not, you're either just not kind of embraced in the culture of like computer science and stuff to where you don't even realize that this is something you can do. It's kind of like being a chef and not knowing that you need a frying pan, or you just aren't respecting your coworkers' time by doing that, and you're making them do a little bit of a lift that you didn't want to do yourself because you were too lazy and you thought, oh, well, my coworker can just do it for me. It's really not on me. I can save myself some time. And that's kind of rude. So it's important, of course, to reach out, your coworkers, reach out to your people above you, the principal engineer. Yes, you're going to want to talk to them. That's a really good thing. You don't want to just say, oh, I'm not worthy, I'm not going to talk to these people. But you really got to respect that they are in a higher level position for someone like talking to a principal engineer or something, and their time is actually probably going to be a lot more constrained than yours. So especially in that case, you want to make sure you have a really specific, good question where you searched on Google, you read all the internal documentation, you know, even the stuff that is probably written by that principal engineer themselves, and you just couldn't find the answer, and here's why I couldn't find the answer, and you know, have a really good discussion. They'll absolutely really enjoy that, having a good discussion. What they won't enjoy is kind of that kind of admission of not having put in the work that they put in themselves to get to where they are. It's really something that is kind of mandatory to be successful in a tech career is autodidactical, self-learning, looking up something, learning on the fly. That's a really important skill to know, because it's all right here. It all changes every day. So it's not like you just learn something about computer science once and you know it for the rest of your life. It's like, well, you learn it once, it can be useful, but tomorrow we learn that neural networks actually aren't that useful of a thing for AI, and here's this whole other branch that is going to be much more useful. Well, you can still learn neural networks, and if you have a degree in neural networks, you know, you're still going to, and are an expert in that, it still might be useful in the future for some things. But really, if you don't learn this other thing that is more useful than neural networks, your knowledge is going to continue to be less and less and less and less useful. Whereas in the meantime, this other thing is going to expand and be more and more and more widely applied and useful. And you're going to miss that whole kind of party, the opportunities and really the opportunities just for fun, interesting things. I mean, that sounds interesting. Like, neural networks are a really good way to implement artificial narrow intelligence right now. So if there's some system that's better than that, like, that just sounds interesting to me. So that's a good attitude to have, to just know that, yes, it's important to reach out, it's important to ask for help, but really think about what you're asking and what is implied by you asking that. Are you implying that you're curious, that you looked into yourself and you want to get to the bottom of it and know the right answer? Or are you implying that you're too dumb, too lazy to look it up yourself and you want somebody else to do it for you? So let's look at the Juniper Startup-Config. And let's go to this Juniper form here and just kind of get a better sense for that, because this is an issue that we're having. So what I'm expecting to see here is that it's just included in the commits. Yeah, so here it says Juniper configuration commit, and it enables you to save to the configuration database and to activate the configuration on the device. Let's see what it says about it starting up. Maybe there's start. What about boot? Anything like that? Boot up config? Here we go. Okay. So yeah, as far as I know, it's really going to just save it. There's really no caveats with that. And in addition to that, that has been the default behavior. It not saving it when it reboots has been an unexpected behavior. And just about every other time I've rebooted, I've only seen it like probably 2 or 3 times where it hasn't held on to that last commit. So it's definitely the behavior of it. I wish I could find a kind of an easy thing that said, oh yes, a commit, Juniper commit command. Kind of an easier thing that just says that, oh, it's going to start up to that configuration. So maybe Juniper startup config. I already searched for that. Is there something boot config? This looks pretty good. Here we go. So it specifies how the router obtains its startup configuration. So this is going to be really important. So syntax boot config. So show boot, maybe? Show configuration. Boot startup. So I don't see any of that, and that's something that can certainly happen. Is it's talking about a different kind of Juniper device, or yeah, it even says here this is for JNCIE 15.1. Well, I do a show version here. You can see I'm doing 17.4, and whether it's E or not, I don't even see that E anywhere. So yeah, it's a completely different thing, but I guess you're just gonna have to take my word for it and just kind of observe that behavior and kind of just trust that that's what's happened. Maybe if it's your first time booting up a Juniper and you have it in the lab, just confirm that, do a reload if you've got the time after you save and see what happens. You can look at some more files on here by using this show log. Maybe there's like a saved startup config, something that looks like that on here. I think that's going to be something important to know on the test, is what's the name of the startup config, because that's really easy to see on Cisco devices. But unfortunately, it looks like it's not something that requires, here we go, rescue and recovery of configuration file. So in the event of software failure, a rescue configuration helps load a known working configuration. No need to remember the rollback number. If you saved a configuration, you can use it anytime when needed. So this is actually what I was looking for. I'm pretty sure this is something like this is going to be on the test. So I'm going to go ahead and set up that rescue config on all of these, just as kind of an extra step in case things really go wrong. Hopefully it will just load up to this rescue config. So copying, this is how to copy it to a remote server. This is how to roll it back. Let's see how to save it. Okay. So it's just request system configuration rescue save. So now should be able to see. I test it. Should say whether it succeeds or not. I should be able to actually look at that file now. So I don't see it here. Let's see if it's here. So I don't see it there. So here's a special thing you can do if you have root privileges. You can go into this shell here. So you're definitely going to want to disable that for any extra users on here that you don't want to have those privileges. So now it's just a Linux prompt. Juniper is based off of FreeBSD, which is a Linux distribution. So it's just a Linux prompt, same thing. And now, so it looks like these are so here we've got the rescue. So it looks like this is how you can look at the startup config here. So it's going to be one of these files, probably not one that is zipped, but that could be the case. And this is a bit, I think, I'm not sure any of this will be on the exam. You can see it looks all messy. That's because it's compiled, it's zipped, so it's not going to print out in plain text if it's not in a format that does that. But let's keep moving. Kind of got a bit off track. So router B is what we're looking at. And looks like everything is configured correctly. We've got 11s on there. Looks like the host name needs to be fixed. But other than that, it's all good to go. On to router C. And you can even see here, FreeBSD. So this one, unfortunately, did not get configured either. All right, and we'll save that for the initial config as well. And this is we remember from last time where I actually did do the commit, but unfortunately there's that bug in GNS3 where sometimes it just doesn't, it treats it as if you didn't save the startup config or the running config to the startup config, but that's a Cisco concept. It's completely different in Juniper. There is no, well, there is a startup config, but there's also a candidate config. And when you commit something from the candidate config to the running config, that automatically saves that startup config. So you don't need an extra command to do that. But unfortunately, this kind of behaved as if you would. And this last time we put this is unwired link. And okay. oops, type external. These are all going to be external connections because it's a exercise between differing autonomous systems. There's another big Cisco to Juniper difference. Cisco, you would just put area 0, but the field for the area is the same length as it is for a IP address. It's going to be 32 bits. So you can definitely put in all 4 octets in that. Cisco, it's kind of not made quite as apparent, the actual length of that field in the packet. You can see that unwired link really isn't used for anything. And this is what I wanted to get to in last video before there was that issue. So long story short, just because in case there's any issues, I don't want to forget about this. When you have a IP address, oh, right, of course. So we're going to use 12 for that. So edit routing options, delete router ID. So now we're going to set the router ID. Oops. Okay. Oh, now we got another issue here. So peer AS number must be okay. So it looks like I put in the wrong AS number there. So edit protocols BGP, show pipe display set. Oh, it looks like I didn't include one at all. So let's go ahead and do that. Group PE peer AS 65542. Okay, so now I'll demonstrate what I wanted to show before, which is a big difference between Junipers and Ciscos. So much like on a Juniper, you can have multiple IP addresses on a port and you don't need to have different subnets on different ports. There's a big difference, and that's you will have routes on links that are down. So let's take a look at 001. We can see physical link is down. So on a Juniper, you're going to see the IP address on links that are down in the routing table. We'll just have this reject there because it's not going to actually route it anywhere. It's just going to reject it. But even though that link is down, a big difference between Cisco and Juniper is that in Juniper, you will actually see it in the routing table, whereas Cisco, it won't even show up in the routing table at all. So that's a big difference to know, and something that might confuse a lot of people new to Junipers. So here's just the step-by-step kind of an explanation before each command. And it looks like all the commands are, oh, no, it looks like these are actually extra commands that need to be run. So we're going to set up a static route on router C. So let's go ahead and do that. And it looks like they want to do it on, they have multiple routing engines there. So that's something that's going to be kind of its own topic on the exam. And that's something I'm hoping to explore later. I believe you might be able to just have 2 of these and then link them both up. But of course, there's going to be an issue with that because you've only got one EM interface on router C. Maybe there's a way to add more. You can go to network, yeah, add another adapter. So if I can experiment with multiple routing engines in GNS3, that will really prepare me better for that exam. But Right now, I think I'm just going to leave that for a later date and continue with the instructions. Oops, static routes. That's a mistake I often do, is I put in router instead of route. Next hop. And now re-advertise. So let's take a look at the help for re-advertise. Mark route as eligible to be re-advertised. So there'll be a different marking we'll be able to see in Wireshark, depending on whether or not this is enabled. And in the last video, I noticed and these are called knobs. The Juniper calls them knobs. So whether or not you toggle a knob is whether or not you have this included in the configuration. That's just something that I had heard for the first time and was not familiar with, so something I figured would be worth noting. And you'll hear a lot of that if you are new to kind of IT, a lot of language that is different than what you're used to hearing. Really common one for people brand new, like right out of networking school, is you'll hear these called boxes, and boxes just like in a general umbrella term when there's no need to be more specific. It's like sports instead of baseball or basketball. So you can just say, you need to look at that box, and it's kind of implied that people know what you're talking about more specifically, so you can save yourself the trouble. So it looks like the subnet mask is too short, so we know that a really kind of nice way I like to think about subnetting is to just 240 is a subnet every 16. So you've got sub network addresses at 0, 16, 32, 64, on and on until it goes all the way up to the max 255. So the maximum values you have is 256, but the maximum decimal value is 255 because 0 is included. So, but this is going to be a 248, so that's going to be every 8 because it's the next one over. So your subnet mask are going to be 0, 128, 192, 224, 240, 248, 252, and then 255. Those are going to be your /32s. So this is a so this is a 24, and then it's going to be +5. So it's going to be a /29. Yep, and we can see it right here as a /29. So it's going to be every 8 addresses. So it's going to be 8, 16, so yeah, I guess I don't understand why you can't have /20, because you have 16 through 23 are all numbers that belong to this subnet, so I don't see why 20 would not be valid. Let's take a look closer into the menu it's calling out specifically. Show routing options static. So it looks like it's taking issue with this destination.17 with the subnet mask associated with it. And it's saying that it's too short, even though it's a /17. So, oh, Well, I mean, that makes sense because, well, you want to, so here we've got .2. So this is in the first subnet of the, if you think of it as, yeah, so in all of the subnets you can get here with this /29, you can get .0, you can get .8, you can get .16, .32, etc. Oh, you can also get .24 because it's going to be every 8. So 0, 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, just counting by 8 upwards. Those are all the subnets you can get with a /29. So you can see this is assigned to the first subnet because it's between 0 and 7. And it's a host address because it's neither 0 nor 7, which are special addresses, 0 being the network address, 7 being the broadcast address. So you can see we're trying to get to a different destination, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's what you want. Ah, perfect. So this is the issue, and this is, I think, worth a downvote for sure. I'm sure the people at Juniper will love to have another downvote for me today, but if they're going to have this in their documentation, I don't think they can really blame me. So we've got a next hop here in the, so if we do 0, 8, 16, 24, this is in the third subnet that you get if you have a /29 out of this more parent block. So we're going to form a static route to a address that we don't have in our routing table. That's why we're creating a static route. So we don't have this .16, the 8, so the second, or sorry, the third subnet in this block of /29s would start at .16. We don't have that in our table. So what we want to do is say statically, oh, well, we need to get there. So let's use something that is in our table and just say, well, you know, this is not on our table. We don't know how to get there. But if you just go through here, you'll be fine. But when we do that, we're really kind of leading it astray because you can see the mask doesn't work if we do that, because we're saying, oh, just use this next hop, get here, you'll be fine. Well, where is that in our table? 198.51.100.20. So that's going to be, if it's a /29, it's going to be a .16. I don't see .16 anywhere. I see .0, but that's a /29. So that's the first subnet of /29. So we need the third. We're telling it to use the next hop that's part of the third subnet. And since it's the next hop, it's going to be a directly connected route. And we're going to have one of those host addresses. And then the router it's going to route through is going to be the one across the link with another host address in that subnet. And we can see we don't even have that subnet ourselves. So how do we even know that a remote device is going to have it? And even if it did, how are we even going to communicate with that? We don't have a valid route in our table for that. It would be a directly connected route. Yes, we have one for the first subnet, but we need it for the third subnet in this stack of /29s. So this is a completely nonsensical statement, and it's completely worth a downvote. I don't think anyone could kind of argue with me on that. Like, this is really going to throw a lot of people for a loop, especially anyone who's even an intermediate networking person might have some issues with this, but definitely a beginner. This is really going to make it difficult for people to learn using this documentation. So before downvoting it, I think I'm going to kind of figure out what the correct next hop would be. And of course, it's going to be So it's going to be something that's in the table. So it looks like we've got this here. Let's take a look at what's configured on this device, this interface. So show interface, this one. So we've got .2 on here. So we're going to need to see what our next hop is going to be. I'm thinking it's .1, but you never know. Yep, so it's .1. So we're going to need to use .1 here instead of .20, because .20, it makes absolutely no sense. It's in the same subnet as the route that we're trying to get to. So how can you say, I need you to go to the neighbor's house? Well, how do you get to the neighbor's house? Which street? So let's say, okay, I live in my house, and I'm telling you, so we've got doors to my house, and each of these doors has a label of where you can go. You can go to neighbor A's house, neighbor B's house, but let's say I want you to get to neighbor C's house. So you're going to ask me, well, these doors only tell me how to get to neighbor A's house and neighbor B's house. How do I get to neighbor C's house? Well, I can say, oh, well, you can just go out the door to neighbor A's house, and you'll get to neighbor C's house. From there, neighbor A will tell you how to get to neighbor C, and you'll be there. But what if I told you to get to neighbor C's house, instead of going out to any of these doors we have here to neighbor A or neighbor B, you need to go out the door to neighbor C's house? That was the initial problem that you had, is that we don't have a door to neighbor C's house. So how are you telling me to use a door to neighbor C's house if we don't have that? We only have a door to neighbor A or neighbor B's house. You've got to tell me to use one of those doors in order to get there. And then once I leave that door and I get to neighbor A or neighbor B, they'll tell me how to get to neighbor C. So that's fundamentally what we're doing here. And that's, I think, a very good explanation about why this really does deserve a downvote. So I will do that right now. So step-by-step procedure. And I'll just, because I want them to know how to get there, be specific enough. And then I'll say, this statement is nonsensical. I need to spell check that. There we go. This statement is nonsensical. The next hop can not be in the same subnet as the static route, because we've already got a route for that. Why would we need a static route? I mean, it's already in the table if it's going to be the next hop, because that's going to be subnets that you have in your table, they have in their table, and then you're communicating that way. The reason we need a static route is because it's neither in my table, it's not in my table, but it's going to be, they're going to get there by going through the neighbor, because it's going to be in their table, either as another static route or as a dynamically learned route. So this statement is nonsensical. Looks like we got a period wrong there. The next hop cannot be in the same subnet as the static route. Was the next hop meant to be 198.51.100.1? And I'm pretty sure and I put a what instead of a was. So I'll submit that, and I'll just go with that for now. I mean, that's really the only thing that would work. So this is really kind of a hypothetical question, because yes, of course, that is what it's meant to be. So I'll just proofread this quick. This statement is nonsensical. The next hop cannot be in the same subnet as the static route. Was the next hop meant to be that? Okay, so submit that. There you go, Norman, keeping you busy. Get a internal Juniper Champions reward or something like that for all the extra work you do. So, okay, so next, and let's make sure I've got this in there now. So edit routing options static, show pipe display set. So I still need to fix that, so I'll go ahead and do that. Oops. Oh, I didn't do a display set relative. This is why I like display set relative so much, because I'm right here. Okay, so now I'm going to delete that next hop and do one that makes sense. And unfortunately, if you're a beginner, this is a reason why this documentation might not even be all that helpful to you. But if you're at the level I am going for the IE, this is really great documentation. And these kinds of mistakes really only help solidify your own knowledge. So, so mask too short. That's interesting. So I'm still getting the error. Oh, okay. So I'm telling it which network to go to. So what kind of address would I need? Would I need a host address? Would I need a broadcast address? No, I'm going to need a network address. I'm telling it which network does it want. Which network do I want? So back into that example of I have a house and I have doors leaving my house. I have door A, B, and you ask me, how do I get to neighbor C? Well, I'm going to tell you to use door A. I'm not going to tell you to use window A. I'm not going to tell you to use doorknob A. I'm not going to tell you to use doorstop A. I'm going to tell you to use the door. So by using a host address here and not a broadcast, not a network address, I'm telling you use doorknob A, use the door hinge on the door A, use the paint job on the door A. You've got to say use door A, otherwise it just doesn't understand. You're not going to understand what I mean if you ask me which door do I need to use, and I say use the mesh on the screen door. I mean, so that one's kind of mind-blowing. That's probably worth its own downvote as well. It's just so mind-blowing that there's that kind of issue in there. Unfortunately, it is worth 2 downvotes. You cannot use host addresses to specify the route. It must be a network address such as 198.51.100.16/29. So that, I think, is really important to be on there. I mean, this is kind of, as I said, like, if you're a beginner and you're trying to use this, you're just going to be so confused, and you're going to need to go to your networking instructor, and they're going to be confused, and then they're going to need a while to think about it and then figure it out. So this is something I definitely think is worth a downvote, that they just need to kind of get it together on this and not spread really confusing information that's going to make it difficult to learn networking. So, but okay, so we're going to need to delete all of this. Delete. There we go. And now we're going to set, and it's got to be 16. We got to do it for both of them. So delete. There we go. So these will commit nice and clean now. And let's keep going. It looks like there's a export policy that's required. So now we have to find the policy. So let's go ahead and apply it. It's going to be applied to the BGP group. Right, and hopefully that commits without issues, but generally policy statements are pretty straightforward. It's just kind of understanding when you would import it and when you would export it that can get really confusing. So it looks like we're on to the verification commands. I'll just do a refresh so this kind of gets out of the way. Oops, so this looks like there's more than just verification commands. There's actually more commands to enter. So we're going to verify that the static route is getting through. Okay, yeah, looks like it's, well, okay, and this is on router B. So that's something to always be aware of, is the host name. Of course, that's something that can be incorrect in the documentation as well, so. Well, it looks like that's not happening. 17, but and here you can see whoever made this documentation did not actually do this in a network equipment. It's not like they took and they copied this from a piece of networking gear and they put it in here. They very obviously used a template and they just went in and modified the template without actually putting this inside of networking equipment. That's very clear that that happened, because you can see there's a host address in the routing table. So that's, you're never going to see that. You're only going to see network addresses in the routing table because you're dealing with networks. You're not dealing with hosts. On a interface, yes, you're going to have host addresses, but in a networking table, it's very clear that this was never actually put inside of a piece of a networking equipment. It was just copied and modified and pasted in here. So that might even be worth a download as well too, because at this point, this documentation is completely off the rails. It's probably not even useful for learning the subject matter on the exam. It's really just a lot of time wasted. So let's take a look at, try to figure out which one is actually, and why. Okay, so I've got to verify that the static route is getting through to router B and router A. So I guess I don't understand how I don't understand this, because first of all, you of course cannot use a host address here. It has to be a network address. And second of all, your next hop has to be a valid next hop, I think. So I might need to cut the video here and come back to this. This is the step-by-step procedure. So that would be nice if I could get to verification though. But yeah, I'm gonna need to cut it. So yeah, lots of problems with the documentation, unfortunately. I think there's a lot of really good content in this video though, just kind of understanding static routes better, a little bit more about the differences between Juniper and Cisco, the kind of bugs you'll see in GNS3. So try to get through this. Hopefully I can kind of figure out what the documentation is intending and kind of fix it myself as I go and get the lesson out of it that it had intended to deliver. But I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.